What I want to talk about is what we're currently doing. What's TORA? TORA is Tight Oil Resource Assessment. And we were doing a very detailed study of the Permian Basin. We're looking at the resource rocks. And we actually now have just added in, there were 6 other basins, the Bakken, the Marcellus, the Fayetteville, the Barnett, the Haynesville, Bossier, and the Eagle Ford, which had been done under Sloan study funds before, which are just been brought into the TORA group. So they're part of TORA also. But today we're just going to focus on the Permian Basin and take a look at what we're doing. The Permian Basin growth, and you've already seen that diagram on there. The Permian Basin growth, this is the traditional oil that's starting back in the 1950s. It peaked in 1970, and that's what's happening with the traditional oil. And this boom, that's the resource play in yellow. Actually, that diagram is about 9 months old. So 3 months ago, I made this diagram. And in black, it shows the drilling rigs, which are shown on this axis, and green is the oil production, which is shown on this axis. We blew, the reason I had to make a new one was, that's 6 months old at about 2.3 million barrels oil a day. We blew right through that at 2.5. That's showing about 2.7. The number is currently about 2.8 million a day. It shows a little bit of leveling at the end of the year as far as the drilling activity. As of Monday, we're at 433, so and during the first quarter, that picked back up again. Here's the basin. What the consortia are at the Bureau of Economic Geology is they're supported by the state. The state gets them funded and kicked off. And then we also rely on consortia member companies who each pay $50,000 a year. We've only been doing this one for about a year. Those are the 9 companies we currently have. And I'm talking to about that many companies to come back into our study and what we're doing. That's a management slide. I'm going to show you what we do geologically. It's a management slide because it shows the work processes. Well, geologists, we're not worried about that. What we're doing is we're doing much more detailed analysis and study of the basin. If you go out and get an EIA report or a wood map report, they're showing just basin-wide kind of statistical study. We're doing that too, but we're starting with the detail of the formation, starting with the geology. And so this is Scott Hamlin's work, who's been doing the Wolfcamp for over 30 years, and that's from core, and that diagram is a Q, this is a quartz carbonate clay percentage, and so we take that from actual core. We've got a core workshop here in Houston, we have one in Austin, and we have one in Midland. So we have a lot of rock and from outcrop also. And we say, okay, well, what are the mineral assemblages look like in those cores? If we look at the entire Wolfcamp section, this was a core of 1,000 feet of continuous core through the Wolfcamp, and that's what it looked like. Because then, Margaret, what we want to do is, once we start our petrophysical model, what we do is we don't let the petrophysicists start making a model. We say, okay, go to the warehouse with the stratigraphers, make sure you understand the rock on a foot-by-foot basis. And once you've done that, then we start making a petrophysical model. And what we want to see is, these are the nearby wells to this particular core. We want to make sure that what we're seeing in the nearby wells matches very well with what we're seeing on what the stratigrapher does. And once we get that correlation made, then we go out and do it. And then the stratigraphers who have done all the rock work go out and start making the correlations. For example, on the Midland Basin side, we've correlated over 1,000 wells, both in the Wolfcampian and the Bone Spring, or the Sprayberry section. And we've done the same thing on the Delaware Basin side as the stratigrapher or the petrophysicists are doing this work. And then the idea is we can start breaking this up in facies, and people argue about whether you should have 5 mineralogical facies or 3 or 7 or 9. And it's really kind of an academic argument because we actually put in the actual number of how much quartz do we have, how much carbonate do we have. But this is what a facies model looks like through the Wolfcampian portion from the west to the east. So here you can see a lot of carbonate debris flows in the B, C, and D coming off the Central Basin platform. Here you see some debris flows coming off of the area that Bill showed us before over on the east, and here's the Wolfcampian A, which has fewer carbonate debris flows. We then put all of this data and information, the petrophysical information, the production information, into a 3D model. That's the Midland Basin with fence diagrams. Here's the Central Basin platform over here. Here's the Glasscock arch over here, so we're looking to the east onto that. The production side of it, we've got a group of engineers that does the decline curve, just like typical reservoir engineering work that your people do at larger companies. And we have another group of engineers doing material balance. And every time I say that, they say they don't like it. These guys are all PhDs. So the guy that's doing the curves isn't a PhD in engineering. He's actually a PhD in physics. And so he has his own type curve that he does. And the engineer that I always say does material balance, he goes, no, I do numeric modeling. And so that's okay. That's what he does because he's a PhD. And then at the end of the day, we have to make sure that the material balance matches where we come up with decline curve analysis. And fortunately, it's working very well. And that's what we show on those. So it really is a bottoms-up approach of what we're doing from the geology of the actual rocks to the petrophysics to the engineering. And then what we're doing is building statistical models. And I was just in an analytical conference about 10 days ago, and it was a great hit at this analytical conference of everything that we're doing there, and then we're putting it into economics. So our charge is to account for every drop of oil in the Leonardian and the Wolfcampian intervals, which includes those upper Penn shales also. And then once we've done that, then we have to go back and say, okay, what's the density of that oil, and how much of that oil can I get out? Because in the high density areas, I can obviously drill economic wells. In the low density areas, I might have hydrocarbons there, but at current economics, I might not be able to drill them, and then we have to obviously play with sensitivities. So here's the Delaware Basin outline. Here's the Central Basin platform. That's just showing how much rock coverage we have. Those are cuttings, whole cores, and sidewall cores that we have covering the Delaware Basin. Here's the log coverage, our well log database. That's not the database itself. That's what we interpreted by May, and 1 month later you can see how much more we filled in. It's obviously been quite a bit in 9 months since then, so we completed to do that. That's what it looks like in 3D. Again, there's the Delaware Basin, there's the Midland Basin, just as far as coverage. I like this diagram. This is both basin. Here's the Central Basin platform. Here is the Midland Basin side. Here's the hole in the Delaware Basin. You know, we have great work and research that's been done at the Bureau of Economic Geology. Those are Fisher's 1949 cross sections. We're putting those in the 3D models also. So when you get, now again, this is the 3D model of the Midland Basin. Now we're looking to the northwest. There's the Glasscock Arch. There's the town of Midland. That's the Central Basin platform. These are some of the faults setting up the Central Basin platform. That's showing the facies interpretations in a fence diagram, because obviously what we want to get to is we take the facies, we take the porosity and permeability, the oil saturation, hydrocarbon saturations, water saturations, both bound and free water, and then we take that and we look at, this is the porosity. You can see the hot colors were higher porosity in some of this section, and the greens, the cooler colors, is low. We take that through our Python scripts, and we say how much oil is in place. And now we're looking north in the Midland Basin. There's the Glasscock Arch, there's the town of Midland. That's the boundary with the Central Basin platform. You can see the low part of the basin there in the A and the B having the highest concentrations of oil in place. The cells that we have, we use 5-foot layers by 750 by 750 feet. That gives you 1 billion cells in the Midland Basin alone. The Delaware Basin is 30% larger, so we'll have 1.3 billion cells, and they're actually going down to 3-foot resolution, so on the Midland Basin side that'll be 1.6 billion cells. Fortunately, next door, I can't do this on my little computer at home. There's a supercomputer in the building next door, so we steal some of their time and use it. But here's what those facies look like if you just did zone by zone, and then here's what it looks like on 5-foot resolutions. So that's why you want to be able to do these models on 5-foot resolutions. So this was a nice black diagram. This fence, here we're looking, this is south to north in Midland County. We have horizontal wells being drilled to the south. The fence on the back is showing the bulk volume hydrocarbon, so that's higher hydrocarbon concentration. Those are very cool, those are kind of intermediate. And then these are the horizontal wells. These bubbles here show the EURs for the wells. Again, hotter colors, the reds being the higher EUR wells and lower EUR wells. If we go to the east, this is near the Glasscock nose in Glasscock County. South is now going, this is north going to south in this direction, so a little different orientation. These are the Wolfcampian B, they're in the same interval as these, and you can see by the cool colors the EURs are lower. So you look at the bulk volume, no reds and yellows, lots of reds and yellows, And so by just looking at the facies, we can predict. Again, this shows, if we look at the individual zones, this is the Wolfcampian B, this is the Wolfcampian A. It's not like that in the Delaware Basin, but it is in the Midland Basin. And then we can take that facies model and bulk volume of hydrocarbon and multiply that out to get to this number. Now, this lower diagram is this upper diagram here, and what we do is use these cutoffs to come up with these areas right here. So we should be able to tell you why, sitting in the middle of Midland County, I'm doing better than I am if I'm working up here in Glasscock County. And so we've got to do this in a three-dimensional puzzle to count for every drop of oil in each one of those facies. The important thing then is to look at each well in the landing zone of each well. I've got some better slides on that. This is showing the individual zones, just kind of color-coded. You'll see it's going to flip back and forth between the zone and the facies interpretations in here. Here's one that's in the middle Sprayberry. Here's a well in the Wolfcampian C or D, and there are two wells right here in the Wolfcampian B. You say, well, those two wells, when you do your model, they should calculate about the same type of EUR in those wells. And the answer is no, they don't. Because one of those well bores is going through cells, and we have such granularity on our cells, we actually look at each individual cell that each one well goes through and does those calculations. So we should be able to tell you not only are those two wells better than that well and better than that well, but which of those two wells is going to be better than the other one in our modeling and 3D modeling. If you go and you pull down the state information, the IHS or the DI information in the southern Delaware Basin, the Wolfcamp trend is everything from the Third Bone Springs all the way down the Wolfcampian Shale. So that's the granularity when you pull down the DI information. So what we do is go and look at every well that gets drilled in the basin, put it into a 3D model, and determine exactly where it lands, what zone it lands in, and what 5-foot cells it penetrates on. These are color-coded by landing zone, so that we know the difference between A, B, and these lower intervals. This is in the Delaware Basin side, again color-coded, the horizontal portion by landing zone in through there. So here's kind of the interesting data information. In the Delaware Basin, there's been just over 6,000 wells drilled. About a third of them are in the Wolfcampian A, about a sixth of them in the Second Bone Springs in the northern portion of the basin. You can see the Wolfcampian B is about a third of what the Wolfcampian A is in the basin. And here's a comparison of the landing zone information from the state IHS DI information. On this axis, you can see they classify pretty much everything as either Bone Spring or as Wolfcamp. But here's the granularity that we have in our models, is this axis going in through there. So a lot better granularity to be able to segregate out what those are. So there shows you the combination of different landing zones. This is in the Midland Basin side. Midland Basin side, there's just over 5,000 wells, about half of them in the Wolfcampian B, a quarter of them in the Wolfcampian A. So a little bit different preference as far as landing zone because of that. Where we have 3D seismic, we can also do the same thing on every wiggle trace and project the wells in through there. The guy that does the decline curve, it's very interesting. Usually if I give a geologist a problem, he'll go out and work on it. A couple weeks later, he'll come back and give me the preliminary results. This PhD in physics, I give him a problem, and he's back in my office in a half an hour. And he said, here's the Python code program I wrote to solve it, and here's the answer. He's an amazing guy. When I first got there 5 months ago, he pushed a button, and it updated 10,000 producing wells in the Midland Basin in 10 minutes with new EUR calculations based on his curve. He actually wrote a paper about 5 years ago that was at SPE. It's actually better than ARP's curves, and that paper shows that data and information. And so he got tired of pushing the button, so now he does it. He doesn't even have to push a button anymore, just does it when the data gets downloaded, and he comes and tells me what the EURs are on 10,000 wells on a monthly basis. So pretty amazing. So what factors influence productivity? That's eventually what we want to get to with statistical modeling. And I kind of break it down into what I think of as geologic parameters. And some of those are reservoir engineering parameters too. It's the static condition of the reservoir before I drill a well. And then the technology factors are the drilling. What zone do I land in? How far do I drill a well? How much fluid do I pump in there? How many pounds of proppant do I pump in there? Total and by linear foot. And so I kind of break those into two statistical models. This is actually from Devon, and I think Devon is one of the better statistical companies. I've been working with some companies about bringing statistics into their companies, And it's very interesting because you need management, data scientists, and domain experts, geologists and engineers, working together to come up with these models. Most companies, it's broken because one of those three legs doesn't work. Very few companies do all three of those legs work. Devon is an excellent example, and there are other companies where it works too, but Devon's an excellent example where all three of those do work, and they were at that same conference 10 days ago. So we make tornado charts, and tornado charts are management tools because we look at every variable that's in the algorithm that we come up with statistically that explains the production, and we can go into, and these PhDs can point to it and say, okay, this factor accounts for this much of the variability within this regression line. And then we can line them up and say, okay, which one accounts for most? Now, in most resource plays, these are never the same. However, things generally kind of fall in the same general area within our tornado chart. So mineral sweet is usually the dominant geologic factor that accounts for good production or poor production. You know, there's poor pressure information. You know, it's interesting, TOCs don't show, organic matter doesn't even show up until the fourth thing on this particular plot, and that's kind of common. And it's not always all. As a matter of fact, if somebody tells them, Bill said he's got 18% TOC, you know what my response to that is? Not interested. I don't need to know anything else. Because if you have 18% TOC, you haven't converted very much of the TOC into oil. So anyway, those are some of the things you're looking at when you look at those algorithms. So when we do statistical modeling, we want to eventually, as an organization or in our particular research, we want to end up with an entire answer that's one algorithm that answers every variable in the equation. But I want to start by understanding the rock first. Because I want to understand where the A rock is, the B rock is, the C rock is. So that's what we're doing at the Bureau of Economic Geology. We're also then looking at the technology parameters, which are the drilling and the completion parameters on this diagram, and say, okay, how do those drilling parameters, independent of rock, affect my production? And then eventually you want to answer one thing altogether. So I can look at apples down here and I can compare apples to apples, and I can look at oranges up here and compare oranges to oranges. But when I have 10,000 control points and a billion grid cells with 20 variables, so that's 20 billion different independent measurements, I can compare apples to oranges. And that's how you're able to do that. That's the team that's working on this on the Bureau. And if, I've got handouts here on what we're doing at TORA and the Bureau of Economic Geology. Love to have discussions with people about what TORA is doing and have more companies involved in what we're doing. But that's how we're breaking down and accounting for every drop of oil. Now, most companies can't do that kind of work, and that's why we do it at the Bureau, because we're using a consortium of companies and getting a lot of companies together to support the scientists that are doing this kind of research. Any questions about the Permian Basin that we talked about?